Hello and welcome to another Daily Muppet. In today's video I want to talk about a slightly overdue review of the Newcastle game. I want to speak about the striker news that I have, some information that's out there, talk about Rafael Leao, but the information that I've heard and been given with regards to the whole striker situation. I'll talk about the injuries and team news ahead of the Tottenham game, and then preview the Tottenham game in terms of what kind of lineup would we expect to see given the team that we have and where do we go with it. So let's get into it. Talking about Newcastle, this is going to be a little bit of a tricky one to cover because there's going to be a lot of different opinions with regards to how we played, especially given, just looking at something here, especially given the result. Given the result that we saw 0-0, what happens after a result like that is people tend to pick it apart and consider that, well, not so much pick it apart, actually the reverse. When you start to pick it apart, it actually looks quite good. With a lot of mistakes made on decisions and things like that. However, people tend to look at the game as a whole and say it was a bad game. We performed badly, or that this player was the worst and is the reason we lost, and this player is so much worse, and these players are all finished, and the types of things that you're bound to see when it comes to United games. Every time we don't get a win, it's always some reason or another, and then a few weeks later, it tends to be totally different. So I want to show first a few things here. I think this is what I've got. All right. I want to again bring this up. This is my kind of go-to on the setup of reviewing the games and how they looked now. I think this is kind of interesting to see. One thing I saw that people said we played a much deeper defensive line, which is true. There's an interesting graph out there that shows that Martinez and Varane play a lot deeper than Lindelof and Martinez. However, that has to be weighed up against the point that there was 2 games of Ammonia FC in there with Lindelof and Martinez, where we were dominating more possession, more of the field, and playing against much more of a park the bus team, Everton as well. But it's not that important. There was a stat there. I want to show this one. I want to talk about that first, that pressing, because people say, or might look at it and say we had a poor pressing game, but that's actually not true in the slightest. It says recoveries in the opposition half were the 18th percentile. 18th rank, meaning it was very low in recoveries in the opposition half, similar to the early games. However, if you look at the passes per defensive action, it was 4th. Why is that? Because possession was 4th. So United possessed the ball a lot, had a very high possession, and as such, were not necessarily making tons of recoveries in the opposition half. It was a lot of possession, and then Newcastle trying to play long balls forward, and then a foul or a set piece or a recovery in our own half after they were going forward with it. But the possession was fairly dominant for United, and it wasn't like Newcastle were just passing it around. They were only, like you see there, fourth in ranked in terms of passes per defensive action. That means per pass, the number of passes that Newcastle make per defensive action for United were up there. They didn't just let Newcastle pass it around. The shots were high up there. Progressive actions were high up there. Incisive passes completed high up there. Successful box entries high up there. Threat generated a little low. And of course, no goals. So when you look at that, when you look at 4th ranked in box entries, 6th ranked in shot creating actions, 8th ranked in shots, 6th ranked in progressive actions, 6th ranked in incisive passes completed, but no goals, you're really looking at one thing and one thing only, which is poor decisions in the final third that led to bad shots and bad decisions, and the shots that were made, unfortunately as well, a couple misses from open positions. All in all, when you compare this, it's starting to get a little closer to the first 2 weeks. I didn't use the same graph here, and I should have, but just to show you this on the left, the first 2 weeks, the recoveries were low, recoveries in opposition half were low, but there was very high progressive actions, very high incisive passes, very high box entries, and very high possession. Of course, we lost both of those games, but we were trying to play our more dominant style, and it ended up not working. But this is a lot more closer to that, rather than this was weeks 3 to 6 when we got 4 wins in a row. You see none of this. It's all low. Low box entries, low everything, low passes per defensive action. None of it was high. So it's transitioning back into a more dominant style, and you'd want to see, you're expecting to see, as we continue to improve, all of these things, the things that are on this label, on this pizza graph, improve. More threat generated, more shots, more touches. The two you'd want to, that you'd look at as a slightly different is expected threat. You'd also want to improve. You want to be receiving less threat. Newcastle created a little bit too much for us, mostly off set pieces. But recoveries in opposition half, you'd like to see that stay low as long as passes per defensive action stay high. So it's starting to fill out. It's still a good performance. It's still a good game. Now, positionally, we're seeing there's two things I want to comment on. One is we're seeing the exact same problem here again. Casemiro's there in the middle. It's pretty well organized. Sancho and Antony holding width. But look at Ronaldo and Bruno. Once again, wrong spot. They're too tilted to the left, leaving Antony isolated by himself. And he struggled with that once again. Antony made some very poor decisions, but he was also very, very isolated. This has to be solved. And I know that in the individual decisions and the individual actions, there's, Fred making poor pass here, losing the ball there, missing a shot. Bruno missed just as many, unfortunately. There was a pass he should have put through to Sancho that went to Ronaldo. There's lots of examples of the team overall not performing, and the biggest thing is the final third. Bruno needs to move. It needs to be more equally shared across the pitch. There needs to be more outlets for Antony, so he's not just cutting inside and forcing it to Ronaldo, which was a huge problem in this game. And really, that's the biggest thing from the overall team, without picking on individual players, is that the shape needs to again improve so that Antony is not constantly being isolated. Because that tends to be, I believe, the biggest issue that we have. And let me see here. What do I have? Did I have something else, though? That was the expected for later. So, that's the biggest concern that I've been seeing with regards to the overall team. I actually think it was a great performance in general against a sixth-place Newcastle team. This is a team that last year we would have crumbled against. Last year we would have performed poorly against. This is not the Newcastle that started last season. It's the Newcastle that caused a lot of problems in the second half of last year. And on the league table for the year, they're probably in the top 4 in terms of points generated. This was a very good team to a start to a very rough week. And I thought that we've actually really started to dominate play and control the game. But the balance of the team still up front has to be finished and fixed. And one of the biggest problems is constant forcing to Ronaldo and the position of those front players. Antony cannot continue to be isolated. And, positionally as well, if you look at those first 2 weeks, you'd want to see Dalot higher, because this is clearly a bit more. It's still off, you can see, but too deep, too wide. The difference between how he started the 2 weeks and the last game is you're going to have Casemiro being that cover in front of Martinez and Varane, but you want to see Dalot getting a little higher and Fernandes moving to the right for a perfect team shape. Otherwise, it's kind of silly, and it's going to continue to not perform as well as it should. The other thing that I want to point out is this, because people are going to jump on my back about this. I know it, because I'm going to say a couple of things, and I'm trying to make this very, very clear. I've said this many times. For the long run, for where we need to go, we need an upgrade on Fred. However, it is a problem at the moment. We need an upgrade on Fred in one aspect: the qualities of his passes forward and progressions and size of passes, and plays forward into creating shots and goals, and also keeping the ball a little bit. However, there is a problem here. We've seen against Newcastle a more dominating display. We saw against Ammonia a much more dominating display. In those 3 to 6 weeks, you had that Eriksen starting deep with Casemiro, Bruno up top, and we were ceding possession and territory. Look at the bottom, and this is the conundrum that Erik ten Hag has in the midfield. You cannot say, well, okay, Eriksen is a better footballer than Fred. He 100% is. Eriksen is a great footballer. Eriksen is fantastic. But we do have a problem here. It's not a trade-off. It's not a direct improvement to put Eriksen in that team. You don't say, oh, Eriksen plays in that game and all those passes get completed and we score tons of goals. Maybe you would make those passes. Would we be in a position to make those passes? You get half as much. You get the second percentile of pressing versus the 92nd percentile of pressing. My point is, they're two totally different players, and they bring two totally different things, especially out of possession. And this is the conundrum, the problem that Erik ten Hag has, is that the perfect player next to Casemiro is a combination of these two. It's someone with the engine out of possession, pressing of Fred, so that he can win the ball high, tackle high, intercept high, block it high, pressure high. With the passing of Eriksen, even then, Eriksen's pass completion needs to improve. He's been a little loose with it at times. However, again, the point being, this is not about, is Fred good enough for the team to win the title? No, the point is, you need someone who does what he does out of possession if we want to continue to win the ball high and dominate possession and get it. Without him, we lack ball winners. It was obvious during all those weeks we were winning games, but settled in deep, we do not have ball winners in the team. When it's just Casemiro, it's an improvement, but it's not enough. We do struggle to control the game without more ball winners. And so unless Eriksen can be now, and we'll see when he plays, will now push up higher, press higher, do more, it's a conundrum for Ten Hag in terms of what happens when you bring Eriksen back into the team, because he will. He will come back into the team. Are you going to lose so much pressing, so much off-ball and out-of-possession movement that we lose possession and cede more territory? Or can it work? Will he press more? Will he do more? It is a question, regardless of what anybody says. That is a question, a concern, just in terms of they're different players. Just understand that. Think with it rationally and logically. They're totally different players, and there's a reason why Erik will go with whatever team he goes with, and I'm sure he'll figure it out. Whatever he decides, I'm fine with. Things have been improving so much. Whatever he chooses and looks to see, I'll be happy with it, and I'm sure it'll work out in the end, but this is a conundrum. In the long term, it is why we want to need another midfielder, frankly, or alternatively, in the short term, putting Eriksen more up by Bruno and continuing to play Scott or Fred in the midfield for pressing and energy. I don't know. It just depends what Erik wants to do, but realize you're going to get a different team with Eriksen than you are with Fred. You're gaining one area and losing in another area. You just are. It is a fact. And it's just something that's going to have to be dealt with. So that's the final thing with regards to that game that we'll see in moving forward, how we do it. If we stop pressing so much or change the midfield for better passing, do we perform better? Is it back to more being on the counter? Or can we somehow maintain possession without all of that pressing? We'll find out. So moving on to striker, there's a lot of news about Rafael Leao, about scouts to him. It all started with the Mullock report, which I believe is true. It's fine. Then other people started jumping onto it. And the thing is that two parts to this. One is that Rafael Leao will be very expensive. Two, our recruitment in ensuing months and next summer will not necessarily be just about going after Ten Hag targets, who Ten Hag wants, who Ten Hag likes. We scout a lot of players. We look at a lot of players. It has to be a balance of what's attainable. He's also not a striker. He falls under the Gakpo thing. And for me, I feel with players like that, if you need two forwards, you sign someone like Gakpo plus a striker if you're replacing Martial and Ronaldo. But in terms of the striker that we need, I don't see Leao as being the name from the club that's there. And the club have been working on recruitment, so I want to talk about this. They have hired people for recruitment. They have hired multiple data scientists and analytics people to work on the data science and recruitment aspects as well as what the team needs. And there is a football department there. There are football people there. This is an area that has to improve. Ten Hag has been very shrewd in his targeting, but we do need a striker. And it's not about Ten Hag doesn't know what he's doing. It's about you need to support the manager and back him up with world-class data and information on who the right fits are, who the best players are, because that's not his job. And the club are intending to provide that by the next summer. And so the names you'll likely see, I would expect would be more in line with the club suggestions, also balanced with what's attainable. Because as of right now, there's not a lot of budget attainable. And so I feel that Leao falls outside of the scope of that and isn't necessarily the striker that we need. He's also another left-sided player. In terms of names at striker, what I have been told is that Gonzalo Ramos, I think is actually how it's pronounced, Gonzalo Ramos from Portugal is viewed as the most, not necessarily the top target, because there are guys like Osimhen and others, but that in terms of a viable target who is obtainable, who they could get, and who fits what the club needs, Ramos would be up there, if not the top, when you're balancing, again, attainable as well as what the club needs. That is the suggestion from football people, from certain people in the football area of the club, in the recruitment area of the club, that is a name that would work out best and be top of the list for obtainable with regards to someone that would fit the team. There are other names. There's another one I'm checking out that I'll share a bit later that I've not heard it anywhere yet, and I don't know anything about him in general. The other name, there's other names out there that they're looking at, but from what I can gather too, based on the names, I haven't done a lot of research on Ramos, but based on some of the names that I'm hearing, is a striker who's maybe not so much like a big physical one, but a bit more like Martial, like think Lautaro Martinez type players. That seems to be the type of profile that I'm hearing they're looking more into, and that leads me to believe they're not thinking they can consistently rely on Anthony Martial, but that he is the perfect player for the team, and that they want someone like that. So that's what I would say to keep an eye on, is that profile. And right now, someone like Ramos is up there. And then we'll see if there's other names that fit. But that's the biggest name that I've heard now, and one I think at the moment would be more realistic. It's very early. It's October. So we'll see. But I do think there's a world where you could see someone like Gakpo come in and a striker in summer if they move on from Martial and Ronaldo. So just bearing that in mind. But that is the information I have at striker. In terms of injuries, Erik ten Hag says that Martial is still not available. Still not training. Still not with the team. So honestly, whether he returns even this month is questionable at this point, and it's become clear that they cannot rely on him. You'd hope over the World Cup he gets fit, healthy, all of that, but I think that is part of the problem, is it's viewed as a perfect player, and as I just discussed, but they cannot rely on him to stay fit. Eriksen just returned from illness, so it's unlikely for him to play versus Tottenham at this point in time, based on the what Erik ten Hag has said and him not being in training. So those are the major injuries. Wan-Bissaka is supposed to return soon. Van de Beek was supposed to return soon. I do think that they will get some minutes in the games coming up, and certain positions, maybe in Europa League and things like that as well. Especially Dalot needs some rest and also needs some competition for his position. Moving on to Tottenham. Obviously, we have a big week at Chelsea, but once again, I expect Ten Hag to pick the team that's in front of him. That's what he seems to do, pick the strongest team for the next game, rather than thinking with the game after. Given the lack of Eriksen's availability, given the lack of Martial's availability, this is what I'm going to say for the expected 11. I put this backwards. I mixed up Antony and Rashford here. Antony should be on the right, Rashford down the center. It's the exact same team except Rashford down the middle. And I only say that because Eric seems to be, when the performance is good, he doesn't really change things. And he was commenting on how the performance was good and that he liked the performance. So that's all I'm saying. I don't know how he views the balance of McTominay with Casemiro, because he's obviously been using Scott McTominay as a Casemiro replacement, saying Casemiro and McTominay are in the same position. So if that's the case, then I expect it to still be Fred and Bruno, because he's used, again, McTominay as a 6 almost exclusively since for the last 2 months now. So if he views Casemiro and Scott as the same position, then I see Fred and Bruno being the only options up there, and then hopefully by the next game, you're bringing in Eriksen. Maybe McTominay starts. Maybe he changes it entirely. I 100% expect Rashford to come in to play with Sancho and Antony and Ronaldo to drop to the bench. Shaw, Martinez, Varane, Dalot, De Gea. I expect really only that Rashford change based on how he's used the team. That's what I expect. I'm not saying that's what will happen or that's what should be done. That's what I expect, and I suppose we will find out. But we're learning a bit about Eric's patterns. We're going to find out more how he viewed that Newcastle game based on how he picks this one. He may believe, because it's Tottenham, that we dominate possession a bit more. And if we dominate possession a bit more, it is a bummer we don't have Eriksen, but we don't really have a lot of options. This is still the best team for probably a game where we would dominate possession. I'd be interested to see if he gives someone like Dalot a rest with Malaysia on the right, just with the options. But I'd expect a nearly unchanged team to keep up the aspects of the second half of Newcastle that he liked, that he commented on. That's what I would expect. That's what I would think we'll see. Again, the biggest question would be, does McTominay come in for Fred? But that would be a change in how he's been utilizing the players positionally in the team. And if it's just based on, seeing if he believes that Fred had a poor enough performance to be pulled out in that position and McTominay to come in. But if Eriksen's not available, I would expect this is the team with Rashford the only change. So that's all I've got for now. I'll keep you updated on the striker news. If I hear any team news ahead of the game, more details, I will put out a video in the morning or let anyone know. But yes, at the moment, just to recap on that, from a striker standpoint, I believe that they're viewing the Tony Martial profile as the one they'd want to go for. More similarly to that, a more complete striker, someone dropping deep, hold up play, all of the rest, rather than just a big physical player. And but right now, Ramos is viewed as the most attainable, high-value target for a striker position from people in the recruitment area that I have, just where that information comes from. That doesn't mean that's everybody's belief, but that's from there. And by next summer, I do expect it to be more of a club-focused recruitment. Obviously, Ten Hag's always going to have his say, but it's also about budget. And Leao may be out of reach in terms of budget, depending on his contract and things like that. So that's what I've got. Thank you for watching. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, turn notifications on. Busy week with Tottenham coming up next, and then obviously Chelsea at the weekend. So we'll see how United get through it. But obviously a win would strongly turn the mood and the tide back up on our direction towards top 4. And a couple wins puts us firmly in the driver's seat. It's very early, way too early to talk about league table. But it would be nice because Tottenham, Newcastle, and Chelsea are frankly a lot of the teams we're competing for in the top 6 and the top 4. So a big week. So again, thank you for watching. Enjoy the video. See y'all later.